I've shown my willingness to work with anybody of any party to move this country forward. And if you want to break the gridlock in Congress, you'll vote for leaders, whether they're Democrats, Republicans, or independents, who feel the same way.
When I'm elected, I'll work with Republicans and Democrats in Congress. I'll meet with them regularly. I'll endeavor to find those good men and good women on both sides of the aisle who care more about the country than about politics.
After a bitter campaign, both candidates promising bipartisanship if they're elected. We're going to get to that in a little bit. I'm back here with the Roundtable. George, Will, probably the biggest display of bipartisanship this week, those photos of Governor Christie and President Obama touring the storm damage in New Jersey. How much difference did that make?
Well, aside from, as I said, slowing whatever momentum Mitt Romney had, anything that gives the president a chance to look presidential. And all presidents go to disaster areas. It's not a unique policy on the part of Mr. Obama, and then to have him with a man who sort of exemplifies fist-in-the-mouth Republican partisanship, Mr. Christie, it obviously couldn't hurt.
A lot of Republicans grumbling about Governor Christie's fulsome praise of the president.
You had Hurricane Sandy, and then you had the Christie bear hug. And the Christie bear hug, I actually believe, did more for the president in this slight movement that I said in this approval rating than actually even really his handling of the hurricane. You had a guy that was more engaged with the president than the Democratic governor of New York and the mayor of New York City. That I think, an iconic figure, I think did more for him. And I think there's a lot of Republicans out there that are thinking like, wow, did you really have to go that far?
What's so interesting, though, about this bipartisan business is that there's a cognitive dissonance going on here, because at the same time that the candidates are closing with this and thinking that this is the way to appeal to the American people, and Americans say they are for this, and many more people identify as independents than ever before. But at the same time that's happening, we have this totally polarized electorate where we see them at 48, 48, 49, 49. And so, what does the country really want? Does it really want bipartisanship, or does it really want to just kill the other guy?
And not only that, but you have the Congress increasingly behaving in a quasi-parliamentary manner. We have the highest level of party line voting since the late 19th century, and voters are behaving in a parliamentary manner. If you look at the polls, George, this month, in the key Senate races, at least 80% of the people voting for Obama in almost all contested races are voting Democrat for Senate. At least 80% who are voting for Romney are voting Republican for Senate. And it's up to 90% correlation in Virginia, Ohio, Wisconsin. So enormous pressure on members to stand either with or against the president because they're being sent by electors.
And I want to talk about what that means for whoever gets elected in a little bit. But let's focus first, because we still have an election 2 days away, on what's going on in those battleground states. Let's start out with Ohio. And Donna, Brazile, I'll come to you on this. 11 out of the last 12 public polls have the president with this small lead. But in the past, and Ron Brownstein has used this term, Ohio has been Heartbreak Hill for Democrats, especially John Kerry. At the very end, it slips away. Does the president have what it takes to prevent that?
Absolutely. First of all, he's doing very well with working class whites. I believe he's up a percentage point or two. He's doing good with union households. The rescue of the auto industry has helped him. 1 out of 8 Ohio voters have some affiliation with the auto industry. I think all of that, combined with the fact that he has a terrific ground game. I know the Republicans discount, this whole notion that you can win on the ground in 3 days. I used to tell Bob Shrum, our noted Democratic guru, that if you just leave me $10 in the last 48 hours, I can make up 2 to 3 percentage points. I think in this race here, the Obama team will make up at least 3 to 4 percentage points on the ground.
Ohio has really, it's ground zero for suffering in the age of globalization. They lost, in the first decade of this century, they lost 600,000 manufacturing jobs. They have one of the worst records in the country of keeping their college graduates in their state. They have the fewest congressmen since the Civil War. So it's a state in decline. But it also is participating in the recovery somewhat, in part because of policies touted by and bragged about by a Republican governor.
The signs of Ohio, the signs of the Democrats' advantage, the signs of the Democrats' advantages in Ohio was actually started to show up in 2004. If 60 or 65,000 people had switched their vote, John Kerry would have won Ohio, lost the popular vote, and won the Electoral College. And those signs, Ohio is a state that's like Pennsylvania, which used to be a swing state, in my view, and the economics and the dynamics of Ohio are now moving in a place that it's no longer a quote-unquote reliably Republican state or a state Republicans could count on the Electoral College. It's now moving in a direction much more akin to Pennsylvania than the other states that Republicans can rely on.
Which is one of the interesting things about the Electoral College, because it does shift. You know, people complain that, as you said earlier, New York's not in play, California's not in play, these great big states. But the truth is it does shift. And so that different states rise up in different elections and become the focus of attention. And it really does make it an election where the whole country has to be paid attention to in a way that it would not be without the Electoral College.
Only 2 Democrats have reached 50% of the vote in Ohio since 1940. And yet Ohio, I think, in this election exemplifies the central, most intriguing paradox of how this is unfolding. On a national basis, Obama is looking at the poorest performance among working-class whites of any Democratic nominee since Walter Mondale in 1984. He's at 32% among non-college white men and 39% among non-college white women nationally in your ABC tracking poll through the whole run. But in Ohio, he's 10 points better among both of those groups than he is nationally.
And
Wisconsin and Iowa as well. And absolutely right, because the Bain story has a cultural and emotional resonance in the Midwest that it doesn't have in the Sun Belt, not as powerful in Colorado, Virginia. In Ohio, the idea of the rich guy coming to town, shutting down the factory and taking the profits just resonates, it detonates.
Isn't that where money made a difference, George?
Sorry?
Isn't that where money made a difference, that early spending in Ohio on those Bain ads?
Absolutely.
Probably. And if it works, Mr. Obama will have a mandate not to be Bain capital. You know what you get from this. But there's another side of this also. Mitt Romney may have been the man who came to town and shut some plants down. Barack Obama's the man who came and tried to shut down the coal industry. Right. Ohio, Virginia, Colorado, and Pennsylvania are 3 important states where coal matters. And it'd be interesting to see in Southwest Ohio how
so coal versus auto.
At this point in time in the campaign, in the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy and what happened with the forces that happened, with most everybody believing that climate change is bringing this, the argument that Mitt Romney is not going to be making at this time is that somehow his environmental policies or somehow his climate policies are going to affect the coal country is not an argument anywhere in this country Mitt Romney
George,
wants to make.
I drove through Southeast Ohio last weekend, and the most common indigenous plant is a yard sign that says "Stop the War on Coal, Fire Obama." But are there enough people there to overcome what is
so if the president
working-class whites?
If the president has an advantage in Ohio, even if it's a small one, that puts more pressure on Governor Romney to do better. And I would say one of 2 states, Donna, Brazile, Wisconsin, or this late play for Pennsylvania.
And I think it's a foolish gamble because, I mean, John McCain did that 4 years ago. He tried to go into Pennsylvania and stir up a lot of, last-minute support, and it wasn't there. President Obama has a strong lead in Pennsylvania, in large part because the volunteers there have enlarged.
He's not much above 50 in Pennsylvania.
No. Well, but George, I mean, we won the state by 10 points last time. I think the suburbs that Mitt Romney is relying upon in Philadelphia, they're not going to come out and support.
Well, particularly because of women. And this is a place, Pennsylvania is a perfect place where this is a problem because you have those Philadelphia suburbs, and that's where all this conversation about contraception and rape and all of that are having a hold. And, it's very interesting because women have not traditionally voted on those issues. They've voted on economic issues. But when you ask African Americans and Hispanics what issues they vote on, they say the economy as well. And yet, they have turned off the Republican Party in huge numbers because of civil rights and
Governor Romney is going to those suburbs today.
I think women are having the same reaction this time around, where they are beginning to feel unwelcome in the Republican Party. And if that happens, that's a big problem.
When a lot of Republicans think about Pennsylvania, they think of Lucy and the football. It always looks good. It's never there. But in 2010, the Republicans elected a governor, both legislatures, 12 out of 19 congressmen.
But you know why? The big reason, in 2008, Barack Obama won those 4 suburban counties outside Philadelphia, Montgomery, Delaware, Chester, and Bucks, by a combined 200,000 votes. They moved. And the question is, in this election, as in Northern Virginia, as in the suburbs of Colorado, you're seeing the same dynamic in these states. Can Obama hold those college-educated white women on non-economic issues?
This Pennsylvania play,
so far he is.
If Mitt Romney was ahead in Ohio, there'd be no play that they're doing in Pennsylvania. I have a thing for anybody. I will take the Philadelphia Eagles to win the Super Bowl this year sooner than I will take Mitt Romney here in Pennsylvania.
And David Axelrod says he's going to shave his mustache as well.
One thing we can probably all agree on is early in the evening, when the results come in from Bucks County, the largest of the colored counties around Philadelphia, we'll probably know the winner.
We also already know, well, I want to get to something else, because we also already know on 2 states especially, 3 states, so much of the vote is in. 70% of the vote already in Colorado, 70% of the vote already in Nevada, more than 40% of the vote already in Iowa. And in 2 of the 3 states, George, well, right now, President Obama in Iowa and Nevada has built up a pretty strong lead.
Well, we've been saying this all year long. This isn't a persuasion election, it's a mobilization election. And the early voting indicates actually that both sides are doing rather well. That's why so many people have voted. And it'll be a marginal difference that decides this election.
But you know, when we talk about all these sort of traditional things, I think the 2 parties are looking at 2 different electorates. And the Republicans, as you heard earlier, were looking at independent voters. And that makes all the sense in the world. You know, independents generally sway elections. But this year, with things so polarized, the Democrats, instead of looking at independents, are looking at ethnic groups. So it's non-whites and women. And it's really a question of which electorate is going.
It's a question of whether it's the numerator or the denominator.
Yeah, but
the numerator is if you're talking about moving independents. The denominator is changing the composition of the electorate, which is key for the Democrats, how they view it.
It's also growing the electorate. You know, I was shocked when I went up to Chicago a few months ago, and back in the day when Matt and I were running campaigns.
I had hair.
Yeah, mine was darker. The field department was actually one of the largest components of a campaign. Now it's the analytics. I mean, they've matched up this technology with the field operation where they knew exactly who voted in 2008, didn't show up in 2010, and that's why the Democrats have been able to double the registration, 1.8 million new people, and part is early voting, especially a quarter of the vote in North Carolina is early voting.
And independents are not, the 30% of we say are independents or 20s are not really independents. There's only about 5 or 6% of people that are really independent that are truly independent. They've already sort of picked their tribe or picked their team on it, and I think the theory that every time that the Romney folks say this, they say, look at the independents in that poll. Oh, we're winning them, but don't look at the overall number in the poll because we're losing.
You know where those independents are going to make a difference, though, is I keep coming back to it because it's going to matter in the end, is the Senate and House. Because when you say, you know, that the candidates have 80 or 90% of the presidential vote, there's still that 10 to 20%, and those are the independents.
You know, look, Nevada is also, we have to say, you know, indicative of something else here. I mean, we're talking about this enormous racial polarization. Democrats clearly have a problem with white, the incumbent president struggling to get 40% of the white votes, but Republicans are looking at losing again 80% or more of this growing non-white population. Mitt Romney, in a country that is now almost 40% non-white, is basically relying on whites for 90% of his votes.
This is the biggest problem facing the country. It divides at every level that exists.
You know, Romney could equal the best performance ever by a Republican challenger among whites. Eisenhower 52, Reagan 80, Bush 88, and lose. And so what is the message of that to Republicans if that happens on Election Day, if he wins 58 or 59%?
And what does that mean, George? Well, this gets us to the next part of the conversation. What does that mean for whoever wins coming in the day after? Almost certain to face kind of a very similar lineup in Washington to one they have right now. Republicans in control of the House, maybe by a few fewer seats. Democrats probably in control of the Senate, maybe by a seat or two fewer. What does this mean for the next president and the prospects of getting done what he needs to get done?
Well, you've just answered the question in posing it. The country is supposedly seething with fury at the status quo and seem to be poised to replicate it. That is, Washington on the morning after may very well, particularly if Obama wins and the Democrats hold the Senate, it will be Washington as it is today, only more so.
Except that there are some issues that have to be dealt with. And that's the question of whether people then say, okay, this election's behind us, and let's actually move on to try to deal with some of these big fat issues.
To me, the dysfunction that is going to be even more exacerbated, which I didn't think was possible, but it's going to be more exacerbated because we're going to have a president elected with no mandate, no real vision, and no real majority, and everything that you just laid out on this is that the political system is broken. People feel no ability to they feel like they have to choose between 2 alternatives that they don't really like in the course of this. That's why We have close election after close election.
No, I disagree. I don't think the political system's broken. I think it's working beautifully. It's a representative system, and it is
absolutely
a divided country.
It struggles to deal with the level of party line unity and quasi-parliamentary behavior that we're experiencing. And especially when you consider, in 2004, George Bush, at the campaign you helped run, won the narrowest margin of victory in the popular vote for a re-elected president ever. Obama today is probably saying 2.5 points looks pretty good. I mean, you're talking about a country that is split as closely as can be. And I'm actually with you. I'm not totally pessimistic about doing the big deal on the budget in 2013, a la 1997, when the country sent back a Democratic president, a Republican Congress. If the country sends back divided government, they might say we have to get this done. But looking forward, the question is, when the country is so closely divided and the parties are so deeply divided, how do we function unless somebody gets...
And Donna, what you guys done in 2010 after that election, even that was a contentious election, but yet the president was able to muster the support with the Democrats and Republicans to extend the Bush tax cuts, the payroll tax, unemployment. Yeah, but
Donna, I was struck this week to read that this was in Politico, but you hear it also in talking to people that actually liberals seem to be getting a touch more nervous at the prospect of President Obama winning. Of course, they want him to win, but they are a little bit nervous that he is going to sell out to the Republicans on the budget.
Well, they're worried about the grand bargain being, a grand attack on entitlements at the expense of, extending the Bush tax cuts for another 2 to 4 years.
Look, if he does what he says he's going to do, that's going to happen. Not the Bush tax cuts for everybody, but certainly entitlements will be addressed if he does what he says he's going to do.
And the Democrats are really pushing the payroll tax cut extension.
He will lose 4 years of his presidency. In my view, he will lose 4 years of his presidency if it's reelected. If he doesn't, within the immediate aftermath of Election Day, go back to what he said in 2008 when he was running and said, basically, I was elected because I was elected to bring the country together. It's more divided today than it's ever. It's more polarized than ever. He should, within 24 hours, reach out and say, we can't allow this to happen.
And that's almost certainly what he is going to do, right?
He is. He's almost certainly going to go back to the deal that he negotiated with John Boehner during the debt ceiling crisis. And the big question will be, and I think you could pass that in the Senate if he wins, and you could probably pass it in the House, but the question will be whether Boehner would be willing to bring it up without support from a majority of Republicans, which it probably won't happen. I mean, that'll be the critical question if he wins in 2013.
He's more likely to do that than previous speakers.
He didn't mean it in 2008. He wouldn't mean it in 2012. He does not think he was elected to shrink the government.
That one deal.
The reason the country is so divided is one candidate wants more government, more taxes, and more redistribution of income. The other wants less of all three, and there's no way, unless we dissolve the electorate and elect a new electorate, you're going to have division.
I want to pull back because, again, we still have an election on Tuesday. I don't want to get too far ahead of it. I want to ask all of you to talk about other things you're going to be watching for through the night on Tuesday.
Well, to me, I'm going to focus really on this historic divide that I think we're going to see, and I think that is an unbelievable thing. What you're going to see in this election, as we've had the run-up to this, is young versus old. Black versus white, single women versus married women, the geographies, the West Coast versus the East Coast, which you've seen, it's going to be even more so entailed. And that incredible divide and it's going to be faith, divide by spirituality, people that go to church every Sunday versus people that believe in God but don't go to church every Sunday. That incredible divide, we talk about our political divide, but that cultural divide that exists in this country is something that somebody, maybe not a political leader, somebody's going to have to address, because that's what's causing much of what the difficulties we're having.
Well, George, of course, I'm going to focus on the whole issue of voter intimidation, voter suppression, because as you well know, 33 states tried to impose onerous, burdensome rules that
many rejected by the courts.
Rejected, but there's still a lot of confusion.
Yeah, and the Supreme Court might be having arguments on Monday.
And look, we might, when I think about Florida and close up, my blood pressure somehow jumps up. But this is going to be a very close election, and clearly in some of those states where we've had this contentious battle over voter ID, that's something I will watch on Tuesday night.
Blacks vote one way, whites vote another, but they do so in a context of unimaginably improved race relations in this country. We can't postulate a national crisis from this kind of demographic result in the voting. What I'm going to watch for is a Proposition 30 in California. 1 in 8 Americans lives in that state. They're being asked to solve their problem, which some of us think is caused by high taxes, by raising their taxes. If they don't do that, the big issue of 2013 is going to be a number of blue states, California, Illinois, New York, coming to Washington trying to offload their debts on the American taxpayer, and that will be a fight that no one's anticipating. But if that proposition goes down, as I think it will, that will be
George,
the
you've also said to keep
issue.
an eye on Gary Johnson, the Libertarian candidate.
Well, Gary Johnson, who knows? He's on 48 ballots. In Colorado, for example, Colorado's voting on legalizing marijuana. He may be the only candidate in history who handed out marijuana rolling papers with his picture on it. But anyway, and
You know that, George.
the question is...
Somebody told him.
Guys talk.
I mean, the question really is, in Colorado, is he going to take more votes away from Romney or from the libertarian counterculture types who are trying to legalize marijuana?
Cokie.
I'm going to be watching women. I think that I'm very curious to know whether this year Republicans have done to women what they've managed to do to Hispanics and blacks. And voter ID, I think, is just contributing to that.
Upscale women.
Yes.
I think in terms of the
Very
result, the
college
two things I'll be watching, the two most critical questions: what is the minority share of the vote? What is the white share of the vote? Does the minority share of the vote continue to grow as it has every election since '92? The second thing I think is this anomaly where the president is running better in the upper Midwest among working class whites than anywhere else. If he can hold that and increase the minority share of the vote, it's going to be a much better night for him.